Hello folks, John Thompson, Spring Framework Guru here. So today we're going to take a look at defining spring beans. There's a number of different ways that we can implement spring beans within the Spring context. So what I'm going to do is show you a variety of different examples. We're going to follow a hello world type example. So what I've done here is I have an interface that for a hello bean, and it just implements one method that says hello. So the first thing we're going to look at is the traditional Spring configuration using XML. So here I've created a Spring bean. I call it an XML bean. It implements the hello bean, and it has one simple method that prints out to the console, hello, I'm an XML bean. Now to define this to Spring as an actual Spring bean, we're going to look at the Spring context file that's defined in XML. So you can see that we have the traditional Spring XML here, and I've defined one bean with a bean ID of XML bean, and it implements the class that we just looked at, which is my XML bean. Now, this XML file, traditionally, it's placed in the resources folder under a folder called Spring. That's not an official convention, but you'll out in the field you'll see that pretty frequently, where you have your resources defined and then a special folder for the Spring configuration files. So to run this guy, I have an XML application defined. We're using Spring Boot, which helps bring up the Spring context for us. And you can see here I'm using the import resource annotation. So this tells Spring to go and bring in that resource file. So it's going to do a scan on that XML file, which will make that bean available to us. So if I come in here and run this guy through IntelliJ, we'll see the output of it. See it brought up. We're in the Spring Boot now, and we can see down here where I have the output from my program. So very simple class here where I just get a handle on bean and then run it. And I'm getting a handle on it from the Spring context. The next thing we want to take a look at is the Spring Java configuration. So I have a package here, Java config. Okay, so in this case, this is a configuration class. Okay, Spring is going to pick up any configuration classes that you either define explicitly in your context to tell it to bring in this configuration class, or if you have it in a package that you've marked for a component scan, it'll also pick that up. So within the Java configuration class that I have here, I have a bean that's marked, and it says my Java config bean. Let me expand this here. So now it's just going to return back an instance of that Java config bean. Now what's important to note here is that this method name will actually become the name of your bean. So the beans do get a name that you can get a handle on. If I was doing auto injection, Spring would auto wire by type, but when I go into my application, I am calling it by name here, so you can see that. So that's where it's just a convention that Spring has that you need to match up the method name to the bean name that you're getting. There is a way to override this, but this is just the out-of-the-box configuration. So I'm going to show you this actually running here. Spring's coming up, and now you can see that I have a different output line that says, hello, I'm a Java config bean. So that's a bean that we define using Java configuration. The final example I want to show you is a component scan bean. Okay, so here I've defined a Spring bean, still following my implementation, that says, hello, I'm a component scan bean. What makes it special here is that I've annotated the class as a component. So when I tell Spring to do a component scan on the package that this class is in, it'll pick it up as a Spring bean and wire it up. So let's take a look at the application here. So Spring Boot by default will look within its existing package and do a component scan on that. That's just out of the box functionality with Spring Boot. So I don't have to do anything special. When I run this guy, Spring is going to do a component scan and pick up that bean. So now you can see that I'm a component scan bean. So these are three different beans that I've defined and brought them up in the Spring context separately. But what if we want to bring them all up together? And From my experience with Spring, you will often see all three of these being used to define Spring Beans. XML is the oldest. That's been around since the beginning of Spring. In Spring 3, they introduced the Java configuration. A lot of the configuration is moving over towards Java, but the reality is you still will probably see XML, especially in legacy Spring applications. And there's no problem in mixing and matching. You can do that all day long. So now I have a runner here. I'm bringing it up as a Spring Boot application, and I'm telling it to do a component scan on the package Guru Spring Framework. So what that's going to do is any of the annotated classes is going to pick that up. So that will pick up my Java config bean and also the bean that I marked as a component. Now the last part is Spring doesn't know to look for that XML file. So on this line here, that's where I'm telling it to say, hey, go check that XML file for the beans. So now we're going to run this guy, and I'll show you the output. And now you can see that it's picked up the 3 different beans. So I've got my component scan bean, I've got my Java configuration bean, and also the XML bean. So these are 3 different beans defined different ways in Spring, and everything's working together. This concludes our video code review of wiring up Spring Beans. I hope you enjoyed seeing the 3 different ways that you can define Spring Beans today. If you like what you saw, I'd appreciate it if you could give us a little social media love. Please like this video on YouTube, or go over to our Facebook page, give us a like there. And if you want to know more, you can visit our website at framework.guru. This is John Thompson, Spring Framework Guru. Thank you.